one of my oldest teachers, Evan Pritchard, known Evan for about 15 years, and he's come all the way down from the Poughkeepsie area to teach us about the Landkeepers and other similar to Bodhisattvas, and the Algonquin tradition is right here under our feet. And Evan's been teaching and studying, and is also part of the Algonquin culture. He's Micmac, and he's a linguist and a musician and scholar, and teaches. I met him when he was teaching at Marist College, Native American spirituality. He also teaches business ethics at Pace, and he's a pretty fascinating guy. So I'm really glad that you all came to hear him speak tonight.
Okay.
Thank you.
Namaste. And I'll start with the red. I noticed that Steve has the red hat on. That's very significant. This is a red headband, and it signifies embodies the power of the earth. The red color is a sacred color of the East. It has to do with blood, but also your life. Where are we going in our lives? And when you wear the headband, it's not a fashion statement exactly. It's a statement that involves fashion, I suppose. But we wear this to honor the earth, basically, and the power of life. And the earth is, we talk a bit about the earth. You know, there used to be an earth right here in New York City. But in fact, there's still earth underneath the pavement. And there's a lot to talk about today, because I want to talk about the similarities and differences between bodhisattvas in the Tibetan Mahayana tradition and what's called landkeepers in the Native American, specifically Algonquin traditions, which I'm familiar with, and the tradition that's of this place, and very specifically of this place. And I'd like to start, whenever I speak, I like to, about Algonquin culture, I like to do a little music. I have a big flute. I didn't want to take it on the subway, so I brought my little one. And you can close your eyes and meditate, because if you follow the music, I don't know where you're going to end up, but it's probably a good place, because I don't know what I'm going to play. Because improvisation is a very big part of it, you know, the spontaneity. So just close your eyes and follow the melody of the flute. So in Algonquin spirituality, there is a very old tradition, and it is a very secret tradition. And not so much that I'll be revealing any secrets, but some of it I can't talk about. But a lot of it I can in a general way. And it is somewhat similar to Buddhism in some ways, both the ancient roots. And I'm going to occasionally look at notes, because there's a lot of, material that comes out. I think it's better it comes out of me in a certain order so that you can follow what I'm talking about. I was just learning, by the way, that Nelson Mandela passed away today. And, I can't say I knew him, I met people who knew him, but my elder, William Commanda, knew him, and so I heard stories about him. And there is this, out of Algonquin spirituality, there's something called the Way of the Heron, and my teacher, William Commanda, was the master of it, and he could stop fights just with a word. And in fact, aggressors, people charging him, attacking him, he would just say a few words and they'd just fall on the ground. I don't know how he did it, but this is part of the Way of the Heron. It's an old technique that I don't know anyone else now that he's remembers. But I was singing at his funeral, and we were in a distant part of Canada, way up north in Quebec, outside during the funeral. And there was a lot of people there because he was very famous elder, and he was 90. He passed away at 97, about to be 98. And then there was this whole entourage of very colorful people with colorful clothes, all walking into this area. Who are these people? And so I asked, who are you? And they said, well, we were sent by Nelson Mandela from South Africa, from other countries than what we, and we're happy to be here to honor our friend William Commanda. That was the prize. I'll never forget that.
Wow.
So part of this spirituality that I'm talking about includes this Way of the Heron, which is the peacemaking. It's very in-depth. There's a lot to it, and takes a while to teach. But Henry David Thoreau in the 1830s was hiking in the Maine woods, and he had two Penobscot trail guides, Joseph Addian and Joseph Polis, and it's just by coincidence that both of them were masters of the Way of the Heron. And so he was sitting around a campfire, probably the first one, Joe Polis, and was saying, so what would your people do if you had a grand chief who was just really not paying attention to your needs and was doing his own empire building? He was thinking of Andrew Jackson, he was thinking of the War of Mexico. He was really into. And they said, well, we just would not cooperate with him. We would not harm a hair on his head. We would love him, but we would also not cooperate. We would just sit there and do nothing. That really works. Well, also, yeah, we could non-violently protest. So he taught them all about this stuff, and then he went back to Concord and gave this speech to a couple of old ladies, as it turns out. But then it was published in 1900 in Oxford, and there was a Professor Salt who oversaw the publication, and then had a friend named Mohandas Gandhi, who said, you got to read this book, man.
Oh my
and
God.
that's how it happened.
Oh my God.
So he took it to South Africa, ironically, where, 100 years later, things finally worked out. And then they said, we need you in India. So he goes back to India, and he starts Satyagraha, which is a Sanskrit word, for truth. And really, he started out saying, we're going to try what Thoreau did. That was the whole premise, was Thoreau. And then they made it indigenously Indian, which is good because his grandmother was Jainish. Also nonviolent tradition that goes back thousands of years. And then, of course, I'm sure none of you know that our friend Dr. Martin Luther King went to India and stayed in a Gandhi community in 1959. They didn't teach you that in school? How shocking. But anyway, he came back, and King really understood this from a native perspective, too. He had it from people in Alabama that he had met, but he learned it more concretely from the ashram. So that brings us up today. So I want to honor Nelson Mandela in my talk. I guess another one that got away, never actually shook hands with the man, but I feel like I shook his hands in many other ways. But I'm here to talk about Landkeepers because it's a very important teaching, and also how it compares to Bodhisattvas. And the Bodhisattvas tradition, there's a lot of popular talk about what Bodhisattvas are, but looking at the old wording and really looking at what the ancient teachings are about them, the more they become like Landkeepers, and I'll explain in a bit. Well, Landkeepers, beautiful bodhisattva-like beings that exist right here on this land, only in another dimension. It's a dimension just beyond this one. I would say probably in some ways still a samsaric realm, but they have made a vow to watch over the land as long as the grass will grow and the waters flow, so to speak, or 1,000 years, depending on the school. But my impression is that some of these people, they'd be seeking enlightenment in the Algonquin tradition. It's called Neo enlightenment. It's very similar. And then when they get to be about 100 years old, which in the Algonquins they expect to live to be 112 at least, come on. There was no pollution, and Rokeby was there. They, about this time, would make this vow, this very serious covenant with Mother Earth. And they would perhaps prostrate themselves and say, I give my spirit to you, I vow that I will watch over the land for as long as the grass shall grow, and protect it, and guard this land, and all those who serve Mother Earth. So you can see, well, if I serve Mother Earth, these guys might be able to help me, and you'd be right in saying that. And you may see one of them before the end of the evening, just out of the corner of your eye, because that's part of their job, to be intermediaries in a sense. They only go halfway. They're not really specialized in rescuing, people who get in trouble, but they are very focused on protecting the land. And you see, in our time, you see this is quite a challenge, especially those here. So, talking about the culture they're from is important because the Landkeepers lived here or wherever in the Algonquin territories a long time ago, and life was very different then. People lived a different way. I got a quote recently. The Indians of the valley shared with their immediate successors one great quality, otherworldliness, life in eternity instead of time. And of course that's oversimplified, because in fact they were people on all levels of the spectrum, from the ne'er-do-wells to those who were fully enlightened, and in between. So I want to convey to you some of this whole spiritual tradition, which is in fact that, the Algonquin tradition, and still has been practiced today. And again, William Commanda and several other teachers really had a deep knowledge of it. And there was much less ego clinging in those days, I would say. I think it's safe to say. People, as following the social norms, would share everything. They would not brag, so much about themselves or accumulate material goods because they didn't have, vans and pickup trucks to carry it around in. So anything you accumulated, you had to carry. So you see there's kind of a built-in check on becoming acquisitive instead of inquisitive. So I want to read you this Great Spirit Prayer. And the Great Spirit Prayer is pretty well known, and it comes from the Algonquin tradition. I want you to hear this, and this isn't like the Bodhisattva vow. It's more of a monastic or aspirant's vow. This is for pipe carriers, really. A pipe carrier is similar to a monk or an arhat, because the pipe carrier serves the people in a very humble way, and does not necessarily have enlightenment, but is striving to become more enlightened. And so here's the prayer. Great Spirit, whose voice I hear in the wind, and whose breath gives life to all the world, hear me. Let me walk in beauty, and let my eyes ever behold the red and purple sunset. Make my hands respect the things that you have made, and my ears sharp to hear your voice. Let me learn the lessons you have hidden in every leaf and rock. And I seek strength, not to be greater than my brothers and sisters, but to help me fight my greatest enemy, myself. Make me always ready to come to you with clean hands and straight eyes. So, when my life fades, as the fading sunset, my spirit may come to you without shame.
Beautiful.
So that's the Great Spirit Prayer.
Wow.
I didn't write that. That's old stuff. And it reflects that striving for enlightenment, for the one who takes up the path and the begging bowl. The pipe carrier, I am a pipe carrier, by the way. And it's a very humble thing. You're basically a beggar, And I was told at the very beginning, you don't go out and, push yourself on other people. You let them come to you. And so, that's the way I've been trying to do it. And so it's a path of service. So just as in Buddhism, you have the arhats who make no claims. They are purifying themselves. And then you have bodhisattvas who have attained enlightenment according to most definitions, but are striving to become Buddhas, and they also make a vow to try to liberate others. And so, similarly, in the Algonquin tradition, you have the pipe carriers who are striving for enlightenment, and then some reach that. And then those people, at some point, see, they don't have to come back, right? Because we believe in rebirth in order to finish what we start. But once you reach that enlightenment, it's your choice. And the Landkeepers are all those who have attained enlightenment, in our understanding. So, again, I apologize for looking at notes, but one of the reasons that I wanted to give this talk here, and first of all, the energy here, as you all know, is very good, but this is a very special place from the Algonquin perspective. And if you could look out, the window in the front room, this is the back room, but if you looked out the window in the front room, if you look really hard, you might see a twin oak. Well, it hasn't really been there physically since 1643, but if you look hard, maybe you'll see, because the spot is still there. And this is very important in terms of our spiritual history, because you know where the mud truck is? Anybody remember the mud truck? Right now tonight, that mud truck is right near where the twin oak is. So you know, there's a crosswalk across Lafayette, and right in the crosswalk, I mean, I see these things, in my mind, like they're there. Still, there was a twin oak. And many trails came from different directions, coming and gathering around and circling around that twin oak in a kind of a giant Stone Age traffic circle. Where there's no car. What?
So we've got Astor Place, people circle around.
That's right. Astor Place is a circle that intentionally echoes the great circle at what was called the Kintukoying, or powwow grounds. It literally means where they are doing sacred dances. Kintukoying. And the word Kintukoy enters English, by the way, through the Pennsylvania Dutch and the Dutch. And so we say Kintukoy is actually Kantukoy. It's actually an English word. And so this was where they would gather around for powwows. Well, the word powwow actually means he is enlightened. It's another word for enlightened. And it's like, it almost implies the great waterfall of wisdom, powwow. And then it became the word for the gathering instead of Kintukoy. But here, we had a twin oak, right there where the mud truck. Okay. And the tradition about the twin oak is that there was already a crossroads there where these paths were coming together. You have the Bowery, which was called the path to the waiting place. And then you have the Sappohannock Trail, which goes from Gansevoort to Greenwich Avenue, across through Washington Square Park, where the crossing of the stream was, or the stream is still there, Minetta Creek underneath. And then you go up to Astor, and then you come up, it follows right to St. Mark's, where the St. Mark's Chapel is, built by Peter Stuyvesant, who no one else knew. And so this is the geography here, but this spot was the Kintukoying, and this whole Cooper Square area up to here was all big Kintukoy grounds. People would gather to dance, and they would also love to listen to these great orators, because not only were they all, basically enlightened, but they were powerful orators that made you cry and laugh. And they would talk about everything. They would talk about the paramitas in their own way, but not listed 1 through 10, but they would talk about all these virtues that were necessary steps to become enlightened. And not that they were grading you and making them like prerequisites for enlightenment, but we all get glimpses of enlightenment, and then we just, cannot always keep it. You lose it sometimes. So practicing the paramitas, or the virtues, which I'll say, help. And there are also signs that you're getting along in that. So they give these great oratories. And one of them apparently died. I guess they all died eventually. But this one must have been great. We don't know who it was. But the tradition was this, and this is universal across Algonquin culture, is that this person had been speaking at the crossroads, which was, I guess, around the world, you prophets speak at crossroads, right? And we do that too. And so here we are at this crossroads, and they buried him face up, and they placed an acorn in his mouth of the body in the ground, because his words were so full of promise and so full of nurturement and, portents of the future. So they put the acorn, the power of the acorn, in his mouth, where all this came from, all this energy came from. And then they close the mouth, and then they bury him at the crossroads. And then over years, what happens is, it's always a twin oak, because, well, I don't want to get particular depth, but think about it. how is those two zygotes going to get out? They're probably going to, there's another word for it, where they call the two green shoots. They tend to go out two different spots, maybe the two eyes, one of them's not big enough. I don't want to get too graphic. But they split, and so then it becomes a twin oak rather than a single one. And what's interesting now is if you follow the news about twin oaks, there have been a lot of 400- and 500-year-old twin oaks up and down the coast, and about 15 years ago they started to fall over various storms as, you know, the prophecies were about earth changes. William Commanda said in 1960s, said, you know, if we don't take care of the trees, there's going to be storms and sickness, and it's because we're not taking care of Mother Earth. So we have these storms, and they tend to ironically blow down these trees. And so the last of them are disappearing now. The 400-year-old twin oaks are falling, and it just, some would say that's not a great sign for our race, but that's what they are. Those are landkeepers. Those people are enlightened. They come back. They don't come back to incarnate. They come back on this other level, and they're watching over the earth by their own choice, and they don't all do it. There's 12 levels of clouds in the sky, and it's really is talking about 12 levels of spirit. And they're like boomies, by the way, if you're familiar with that term. And so those who become enlightened have choices. They can dwell on some of these very lofty levels where there's lots of enjoyment and bliss. And we say the summer land is the proper term in Algonquin turned into English. You know, happy hunting ground is a little cheesy, but you can say summer land, and everybody knows what you mean. That's the good place in heaven. Wasawadu in Mi'kmaq, and I speak Mi'kmaq, that's the place of the great light. And that's an ancient term. And so these people who attain this enlightenment can go there, but they choose to denounce that, to, you know, turn away from that nirvana and become landkeepers, which is a hard job. And they can do it forever. So I wanted to tell you about that, so you understand why I like this place, because here we are, just feet away from where the great orators spoke. And it's interesting that Abe Lincoln gave one of his greatest speeches at the Cooper Union, which again is about as far from the mud truck as we are. You know, I think the spirit of these ancestors got somehow into his mouth like an acorn, and he just blasted, and everybody cheered, like in the papers in the New York Times in 1859, 1860, late 1860s, that the crowd was cheering and making noises like wild Indians. I think that's, see? I don't know. They do this research, and you never know what's going to come up. But there were 4, you know, we don't know the names of the prophets or the enlightened ones. The word is Neolin. Neolineu would mean he is enlightened, or she is enlightened, the same word. There's no gender. And so they were out here. We know that. We can piece that together, but we don't know who their names, but we know their children, their grandchildren. Because these are Delaware people that were living here, and we use a broad term, and they were moved, they were pushed out of Manhattan. And by 1700, they put I think it was Belcher, put a price on the head of every Indian. So they had to get out of here, you know. The last batch out of Manhattan left about 1700. And so they went west, and they went into Ohio. And we know Neolin, O'Neill, Papahank, and Wangoman were 4 prophets living in Ohio whose ancestors were from New York and New Jersey. And you can bet that at least one of them was out at that tree at some point, their ancestors. So we have a connection. And Wes Locker, who's a famous writer, he said in 1762, a Delaware Indian prophet named Neolin, which means enlightened in all our Algonquin languages, exhorted the Delawares, who were then living in Ohio, to return to their state of living before the coming of the white man. Neolin wept as he preached that the Indians should discontinue the use of firearms, purge themselves of sin, he said, is the translation, by taking emetics, that also they would fast, by the way, and make fires by using only the wooden fire drill and not the flint and steel of the white man. Later, in 1766, a Munsee named Wangoman also preached revivalism, that would be revival of native ways. But neither he nor Neolin were able to change the living pattern of the tribe. So that's from a famous scholar. So just so you know, reality check, people know about this. So let's talk about a little bit about enlightenment. I have listed for next week at the same time, a talk to go into what is enlightenment in Algonquin culture and in Buddhism. And basically it's the same in the most common definition of enlightenment would be that you, as Robert Thurman would say, it's an extension of your identity. You extend your identity so that your happiness is not just your happiness, but includes the happiness of others. So that you lose the distinction between my happiness versus your happiness. And then it's not just one-on-one with a lover, but becomes the whole world. And then everybody, all the people, that their happiness becomes your happiness. So it's an extension of identity. And also becoming one with all life. And particularly, it says, if you read, all sentient beings, and that's interesting, because I just think a lot of people just say, oh, I don't know what it means, I'm not going to look it up. Okay, they love people. That's not what it means. A sentient being is any being that has senses, that has eyes and ears, nose and mouth, or touch sensitive. Sentient beings includes animals. It doesn't include plants. Well, there are scientists who believe it does.
Well, that's a debate within Buddhism.
And that's a debate, yes.
You find different answers.
And you find different answers. But people who aren't really serious about it, they just kind of skim over, oh, sentient, it means people. No, it doesn't mean people. So when you break that barrier, you realize that the Bodhisattva vows have to do with striving for the liberation of all sentient beings, including animals. Well, in Algonquin, we would probably pretty much include plants in that, and it's arguable too. Okay? And we would go to rocks on a good day because rocks are filled with Manitou, or the overriding spirit that's everywhere. So in every rock and tree, every leaf and plant, we say that. So for the Landkeepers, you see, when they achieve this enlightenment, which is the same definition, word for word, that to become one with all sentient beings, one with all life. Okay? And then in love, the love is there because that's part of the oneness. And then they include, of course, plants and animals, because it's natural. So you see that their role is a sensible one, because then they're taking on this vow that they will protect the earth, that will reduce the suffering. So, well, going back to the Bodhisattvas, there's several definitions. One is that a Bodhisattva is one who is enlightened, one who is striving to become a Buddha, and according to, again, Robert Thurman, Buddhas have knowledge. They're teachers of the gods. They have universal knowledge, which separates them and distinguishes them from Bodhisattva. But a Bodhisattva also takes a vow to reduce or eliminate the suffering of sentient beings, and until all are liberated. And that also ties into the Landkeepers, who are reducing suffering by what they do, whether they staying over a certain territory, they stick to a certain area, and they watch over and make sure there's minimize the suffering of the earth, but also the people on it. Now, one of the things that, again, I was reading some Robert Thurman, he talks about this idea, well, if you're a Bodhisattva and you want to bring happiness to others, that you might give them a flower, you might have a song or a piece of music or a teaching, and it makes them happy and satisfied they're getting this. And you are conveying your consciousness through that. Because that's very temporary. So some Bodhisattvas have decided they want something more permanent. So maybe they create a garden or build a temple, something of lasting value, write a book. And you think about, and it mentions gardens, and thinking, well, that ties in too, because you think about, okay, so these Landkeepers, they may be able to do this and that in a limited way, but actually they're creating and maintaining gardens of their own kind. Algonquin people, they didn't have English gardens like the Brook and Botanical Garden. They cultivated herbs and flowers too. Very important. Flowers are important to Native people, and it never gets into the movies, right? You never see Native American warriors sniffing flowers. Why? Well, look at the culture. Rose is a very popular name among Native people for women, and also you look at the bandoliers and the beadwork among all the Great Lakes people. It's giant, colorful, vivid flowers. You'd think they were on LSD or something. They weren't. But big floral patterns is very important.